Shalom, everyone. The Gemara in Nazir, page 32, is giving us a glimpse of a very interesting, somewhat heartbreaking, of the reality of Chachamim in Eretz Israel and Bavel after the destruction of the temple. And Chachamim viewed their life after the destruction of the temple always towards the temple. And it wasn't only the first temple, it was the first temple and the second temple, the second destruction and the first destruction. So let me share the pages and let's see what the Sugya is telling us. So we're talking today about Nazirites and the destruction of the temple. And the Mishnah in page 32 is telling us the following story. And this was an error that Nahum the Madi erred when he failed to distinguish between an event that occurred before the vow of a Nazir was taken and an event that occurred after. The incident in question was as follows. When Nazirites were ascending from the exile, sacrificed their offering, and they found the temple destroyed, Nahum Madi said to them, if you had known that the temple would be destroyed, would you have taken a vow of Naziranship? They said to him, certainly not, as there is no remedy for the Naziranship in this case. And Nahum Madi dissolved their vow for them. Now, this story, there's so much to say about this story. But let me just start with Nahum Madi. Like, it's a name we don't hear very often in the Talmud, and indeed it doesn't mention many times. But we do know that Nahum Madi was one of the great Dayanim, the law officials of Halakha, who were there during the time of the Second Temple. He was in office towards the end of the time of the Second Temple, probably mostly working around the year 40 and on. In other words, he lived and worked as a Dayan before the destruction of the temple, and he's also around after the destruction of the temple. He might be from Madai. Madai is another name from Persia, and Persia, who conquered Babylon, who conquered Assyria, all these great empires in the ancient world. And we hear of few Chachamim that also came from this specific area of in the Mesopotamian world from Madai. So Nahum Hamadi is looking at those people who are Nazirim that came from the Golah to bring sacrifice, and to their very, surprise, they found out that the temple was destroyed. Now, this is such an amazing historical piece of information that we hear, even though the topic is Nazirut. But by the way, we hear that there were Jews far away in the diaspora, in the exile, that the message of the destruction of the Second Temple didn't come to them yet. And, there's no newspapers, there's no radio, no WhatsApps. And only when they got to the land of Israel did they find out that the temple was not there, it was destroyed. We can just imagine, the despair, the agony of those people. But in any case, they came to sacrifice the Nazir sacrifice. And when they found out that, they made the vow for nothing, what are they going to do about being Nazirim? Do they need to stay Nazirim forever? Or for the amount of time that they made the vow? So Nahum Madi asked them, how do you know that that the temple would have, there's a possibility for the temple to be destroyed? Would you make that vow? And they said, no, certainly not, because why would someone make a vow of Nazir if they know that the temple doesn't exist and they can't bring the sacrifice? So he dissolved the vow for them. He said, okay, fine, your Nazirut ends. It continues in the Mishnah that Chachamim think exactly the opposite, and they say, when they made the vow, the Mikdash was there. There was no way for them to assume that the Mikdash would be destroyed. So they have to keep their Nazirut for as long as they made it. But what I want to focus on today is mostly on the words of Rav Yosef, where we're stepping into the Gemara in Bavel. Rav Yosef is one of the first Amoraim in Bavel. In other words, we are further away from the land of Israel and from this destruction of the temple, not like Nahum Madi, who witnessed the destruction. And Rav Yosef is saying, if I had been there, when the Nazirites arrived, I would have said the following to them in order to dissolve their vows. Isn't it written, like he would tell them, don't you know the pasuk in Yirmiyahu? Isn't it written, the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord, the sanctuary of the Lord are these? Okay, he's quoting a very famous pasuk in Yirmiyahu. When Yirmiyahu is telling the people in the beginning of the 40 years, Yirmiyahu was a prophet for 40 years. He's the only prophet who gave prophecy and actually lived to see his prophecy, which is, very tragic in my opinion. But so Yirmiyahu Navi, in the beginning of the time, when he had hope, when God told him there's still hope, tell them to correct their ways. One of the challenges that Yirmiyahu had in front of him was Nevi'ei Sheker, the false prophets, who are walking around and spreading lies to the people. They might themselves believe that they're saying something true or have some divine prophecy, but that's a different topic. But what Yirmiyahu Navi is telling the people, please don't listen to them. Just be good, make tshuva, become better, act better to the widow and to the orphan and to the stranger. And the main thing that Yirmiyahu is also telling them, they are misleading you. They're telling you that there's no way God is going to destroy its temple, because how can it be that God will destroy a holy place like the temple? And he said it 3 times. In Hebrew, it's Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem Hema. The sanctuary of the Lord. Don't believe Yirmiyahu, the false Nevi'im, are telling the people. He's lying to you. It's not going to happen. So Rav Yosef is saying to us in Bavel, after knowing that not only the first temple was destroyed, and also the second temple was destroyed. And he's using a verse from Yirmiyahu to say there's something about what the concept of the people of Israel that they didn't understand it well. So he's using it to say, I would tell the Nazirim, what do you mean you didn't assume the temple could be destroyed? It's already said so in Yirmiyahu. First time Eichal Hashem was destroyed in the first temple. Second time, if it says second time Eichal Hashem, you should have known that the temple will be destroyed a second time. And he's giving us a historical perspective of understanding that there were always a danger for the temple to be destroyed because it's connected not to the holiness of the temple, but to the behavior of the people. So continues the Gemara and says, this thrice repetition of sanctuary of the Lord is referring to the first temple and the second temple, which are destined to be destroyed, leading to a third temple. That's the third time. So the explanation of Rav Yosef of this verse is not the pshat, but he's using it to say, I would tell them. And I'm hearing here that Rav Yosef is saying, we should always be careful. We can lose everything we have if we don't behave well. But what do we do in the Jewish world post-temple, when there's no temple? How do we create closeness to God? Okay? And I'd like to answer that question through looking deep into the Psukim in Yirmiyahu and then give some commentators on them. So says Yirmiyahu, it's chapter 7. Thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, mend your ways and your actions, and I will let you dwell in this place. Literally means in Israel. Don't put your trust in illusions and say the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord are these buildings. So the Targum Yonatan, the Aramaic Targum on Yirmiyahu, is saying the following. Like, why do we have this 3 times the repetition? Says the Targum, 3 times a year they would appear before him. Of course, B'Shlosha Regalim, 3 times a year they would appear before the Lord as servants of the Lord. But here, appear in the Hebrew, in the Targum, means they're going to make up. They're going to be in disguise. They're not for real. They're putting an act, saying, 3 times a year, Shlosha Regalim, you have to go to the temple. Let's do it. Mark a V on what we did. But inside of them, they had no yirat shamayim. They were not good people. They were corrupt people. And even coming to the house of Hashem, they put an act and they did not behave truthful. Another midrash is quoting, is agreeing with what we heard in Targum Yonatan, and he's saying the same principle applied to I hated and despised your festivals. Yeah, we hear about it in the Navi Amos, and he says, I despise your holidays, your festivals, that you kind of do it for me, but your heart are not in the right place. But the Midrash is giving another possibility. He said to them, behold, the 3 sanctuaries which were destroyed, Nov and Shiloh and Givon, take care that this one will not be destroyed. In other words, the Midrash is saying, Yirmiyahu is telling the people, you don't know history? Don't you remember that God destroyed Nov, Shiloh, and Givon, all the cities where Aaron Hashem dwelled at when the Mishkan was? There's no problem for God to destroy the places where His holy is at, because what He needs is not to have a place to dwell. He doesn't mind the holiness. He minds us. And if we are not behaving correctly, if we're not trying to behave like the Tzelem Elokim that we have, the image of God that we have in us, there's no point for the Mikdash. And like He destroyed all these 3 cities, He will destroy Yerushalayim and the temple if you will not behave yourselves. And the Mitzudat David is giving a commentator in the 18th century, and he's giving another angle to that. And he says, in the temple, the Lord's temple have 3 times to indicate the hall and the palace and the inner sanctum, which are called temple, and therefore the plural was used since there are 3. So the Mitzudat David is saying, when we say that God can destroy the temple, we should remember that the temple is made out of 3 important areas, 3 important places of holiness. There's the ulam, and there's the heichal, and there's the dvir, the sanctuary itself, Kodesh HaKodeshim, where is leading to Kodesh HaKodeshim. So therefore, that's why Yirmiyahu said it 3 times. Now, through hearing those commentators, I do want us to remember that these are all coming to explain to us not only Yirmiyahu, but I definitely think that this is what we should hear in the words of the Gemara. When the Mishnah is quoting an halachic story about Nazirim that didn't hear about the destruction of the temple, we're asking ourselves, indeed, what are we going to do after the destruction of the temple? It's not only the technical problem of Nazirim. And that's why Rav Yosef is saying a more fundamental thing. How they did not remember that we shouldn't take for granted having a mikdash, and it has to be with how we act in the world. And with that, I want to end with a beautiful commentary by Harav Amiel. Harav Amiel lived in the beginning of the 20th century. He was one of the first religious Zionist thinkers and rabbis. And he's saying a truly beautiful thing. Says Harav Amiel, also, which the temple stood, the prophet said, also while the temple stood, Yirmiyahu, the prophet said, do not believe the false words that the Lord's temple, the Lord's temples they are. Like the commentator explained, that the real temple of the Lord is only them, the people themselves with a divine image in them. Says Rav Amiel, that while Yirmiyahu is talking about the palace of God when the temple is still there, and he's telling the people, destroying God's temple, he can do that. He doesn't care about the place, the building. He cares about your heart. You are Hashem Hema, you, them, the people, with a divine image in us. If we're able to build or rebuild God's existence in us, behave the way that we should behave in order for a temple, a sanctuary to exist in our lives, says Rav Amiel, for if you will surely improve your ways, you will not exploit convert and widow. I will dwell among you in this place forever and ever. And he quotes the rest of Yirmiyahu's words. In other words, I believe that also with Rav Yosef, and also with Nachum Hamadi, and also with Chachamim in this Sugya, what they have in their mind is also the question of what do we do with the depth of Avodat Hashem, not only the technical, but the ability to be closer to God. So we used to have Nezirut, and we used to have Korbanot. What do we do now? Not only, and we know the amazing Chidushim renewals of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai that said, no temple but prayers, no temple but chesed. Here, Through the Sugya of Nazir, we cannot get closer to God through being a Nazir, but we should remember, now that there's no temple, after the destruction of the temple during the Tanaim time, during the Amoraim time, and the rest of Jewish history till today, says Rav Amital, Hema, it's in us. We can create room for the divine spirit in us. And the way we do it is by acting as people who were created in the image of God, remembering always to look around us, because the people around us are also, as Rabbi Isaac says, are people like us, having the image of God, which means to behave in justice, in chesed, in mishpat, with love and with passion, and mercy to all the people around us, and that will create the mikdash, the mishkan, the heichal in us, inside of us, and among us. Thank you very much.